Roy drove the old cart slowly up the mountain road, his hands steady on the reins. The wheels rattled over loose stones and cracked dirt. The air up here was thin and sharp, and every breath came out as a small white cloud. Beside him, Meg sat wrapped in her thick brown coat, her small boots dangling off the edge of the seat, her eyes fixed on the great dark shape rising ahead of them. The dragon stronghold. It was enormous. Roy had seen big buildings before. He had fixed furnaces in old castles and boilers in stone towers. But this was something else. The stronghold was carved right into the mountain itself, like something had reached down and pressed the rock into shape with bare hands. The walls were black and smooth. The gates were taller than 3 men standing on each other's shoulders. And sitting on either side of those gates were 2 dragon guards, still as statues, watching the cart come up the road. Meg did not flinch. Roy noticed that. He noticed it because he himself had to take a slow breath and remind himself that he had been hired to do a job. That was all. Just a job. He pulled the cart to a stop in front of the gates. One of the guards lowered its great head and looked at him with one pale yellow eye. "You are the repair man," it said. It was not a question. "Yes," Roy said. "Roy Barton. I was sent for the heating forge." The guard straightened up and the gates opened slowly, grinding against the stone floor with a low heavy sound that Meg felt in her chest. She pressed her lips together and said nothing. Roy clicked his tongue and the old horse walked them inside. The courtyard beyond the gates was wide and empty. A few dragon attendants moved along the far walls, heads down, steps quick. No one was talking. No one was stopping to look at anything. Everyone moved like they were trying not to be noticed, like they were afraid that if they slowed down something bad might happen. Roy climbed down from the cart and began unloading his tools. Meg climbed down too and stood beside him, looking around. "It is very quiet," she said. "Keep your voice down," Roy said quietly. "I am keeping my voice down," Meg said. "It is still very quiet." Roy could not argue with that. The place felt like a held breath. Like everyone inside was waiting for something, though no one seemed sure what. A young dragon attendant came to meet them. It was smaller than the guards, with pale green scales and careful eyes. It bowed its head slightly at Roy and then looked at Meg with mild surprise, as if it had not expected a child to be part of the arrangement. "The forge is this way," it said. "Please follow me." Roy picked up his tool bag and nodded at Meg to stay close. They followed the attendant through a wide stone corridor that went deep into the mountain. Torches lined the walls, but the light they gave was thin and pale. The cold got worse the further they went in, which was the wrong way round. A forge was supposed to make a place warm. That was the whole point of it. "How long has the heat been out?" Roy asked as they walked. 4 days, the attendant said. "And the queen? How is she managing?" The attendant was quiet for a moment. Then it said, "She is not well. The cold is not helping." Roy nodded and said nothing more. They came to the forge room at the end of the corridor. It was a large round chamber with a great iron furnace at its center, dark and dead and cold. Roy could already see from the doorway that the main draw pipe had cracked along the side seam. A straightforward problem if you had the right tools and enough time. He set his bag down and crouched beside the furnace to get a closer look. Meg stood in the doorway and looked around the room. Then she looked back out into the corridor. The attendant had already gone. The corridor stretched away into the dim quiet of the stronghold. She could hear her father tapping at the iron, muttering to himself the way he always did when he was working through a problem in his head. She knew that sound well. It meant he would be busy for a long time. Meg looked down the corridor. Then she took one small, quiet step out of the forge room. And then another. Meg followed the corridor slowly, her boots making soft sounds on the stone floor. She was not trying to go anywhere in particular. She just did not like standing still in a cold room while her father tapped at pipes and talked to himself. The corridor turned left, then right, then opened into a wider passage. Meg followed the smell. It was faint at first. Something warm and faintly sweet underneath all the cold stone air. She followed it the way she followed the smell of breakfast on school mornings, without thinking about it, just letting her nose lead her feet. The kitchen was large. Much larger than she expected. It had 3 long stone counters and 2 wide hearths with low fires burning in them, which explained why this was the warmest room she had found so far. Pots hung from iron hooks on the walls. Bags of grain and dried herbs sat in rows along the back shelf. And standing around the counters, not really doing very much, were 6 dragon servants. They all looked up when Meg walked in. Meg looked back at them. They were smaller than the guards at the gate. Kitchen dragons, she supposed, tended to be built a little differently. Still large by any human measure, with thick arms and wide hands built for heavy lifting. but their faces were different from the guards. Softer somehow. Less like stone and more like people who were tired and worried and trying not to show it. One of them, a broad-shouldered female with dark red scales and a plain linen apron, spoke first. "This is not a place for visitors," she said. Not unkindly. Just a fact. "I know," Meg said. "I smelled something nice and I followed it." "Sorry." The dragon blinked. She had clearly expected an argument or at least an excuse. A simple apology seemed to catch her off guard. "You are the repairman's daughter?" the dragon said. "Yes. My name is Meg. My father is Roy. He is fixing the forge." "We know," the dragon said. "We are hoping he finishes quickly. The cold is bad for the queen." Meg stepped a little further into the kitchen. None of the dragons moved to stop her. She looked around at the pots and the low fires and the food sitting on the counters that did not appear to have been touched. "Why is everyone so sad?" she asked. A couple of the dragons exchanged looks. One younger one, with pale scales and nervous hands, looked down at the floor. The broad-shouldered one in the apron was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The queen is unwell. She has been unwell for some time. And she has not eaten properly in many days." "What is wrong with her?" Meg asked. "We do not fully know," the dragon said. "She is not injured. The healers have looked at her many times. Her body is resting. But her spirit is very low. She does not speak much. She does not eat much. She looks out the window and that is mostly all she does." Meg looked at the food on the counter. There was a large plate of something rich and dark sitting there, clearly prepared with great care. Meats and sauces arranged very neatly. "Is that for her?" Meg asked, nodding at the plate. "It was," the dragon in the apron said. "We prepared it this morning." She sent it back without touching it. "That is the third meal today she has not eaten." The kitchen was very quiet after that. The small fires crackled. One of the younger dragons turned away and pretended to be busy with something on the back shelf. Meg stood there for a moment thinking. She thought about the time she had been sick as a small child. Not body sick but the other kind. The kind where nothing feels right and everything feels heavy and you do not want to eat or talk or do anything at all. Her mother had known exactly what to do on those days. She had never made a fuss about it. She had never asked too many questions. She had just gone quietly into the kitchen and come back a little while later with a small warm plate and sat beside Meg on the bed and not said very much at all. It had always helped. Meg had never quite understood why. She looked up at the dragon in the apron. "Could I use the kitchen for a little while?" she asked. "I want to make something." The dragon stared at her. "You are a child," she said. "I know," Meg said. "But I am quite good at this one thing." The dragon in the apron, whose name Meg learned was Dora, stood and watched with her arms folded while Meg looked through the kitchen shelves. Meg did not ask for much. Just flour, oats, a small jar of honey, a little butter and a pinch of salt. Dora pointed to where each thing was without saying anything. The other dragons in the kitchen stopped pretending to be busy and just watched openly, which Meg did not mind. She was used to people watching her work. Her father was the same way in his workshop. She found a small mixing bowl and a round baking tin that was a little too big but would have to do. She measured things the way her mother had taught her, not with proper weights but with her hands and her eyes. A fistful of this. A slow pour of that. Enough honey to make it smell right. Dora leaned over once to look into the bowl. "That is a very small amount of food," she said. "It is supposed to be small," Meg said. "Big food is for when you are hungry. This kind is for when you are sad. It needs to be something you can finish." Dora looked at her for a moment and then straightened up and said nothing more. Meg mixed everything together until it was smooth and then poured it into the tin and carried it carefully to the nearest hearth. One of the younger dragons, without being asked, moved a flat iron shelf into position over the low fire so Meg could set the tin on it properly. Meg thanked him. He looked away quickly and pretended that had not happened. The kitchen filled with a warm and gentle smell as the cake baked. It was a simple smell. Honey and oats and something toasty underneath. Not grand. Not rich. Just warm. A couple of the dragons shifted on their feet and breathed it in without meaning to. Meg sat on a low stool and waited. When the cake was done she lifted it out carefully using a folded cloth. It was golden on top and soft in the middle and slightly uneven on one side because the tin had been too big. She let it cool for a few minutes and then pressed the tip of one finger gently into the top of it and nodded to herself. She found a small wooden board to use as a tray. She set the cake on it. Then she looked around, found a short stub of candle in a drawer, and set that on the board too, off to the side, just for company. She picked the whole thing up carefully in both hands. "Which way is the queen's chamber?" she asked. Every dragon in the kitchen went very still. Dora looked at the board in Meg's hands. Then she looked at Meg's face. The child was completely calm. Not nervous. Not showing off. Just a girl with a cake who wanted to know which direction to walk. You cannot simply walk into the Queen's chamber, Dora said slowly. I know there are guards, Meg said. I just want to drop something off. I am not going to stay long. Dora pressed her mouth together. She looked at the other dragons. None of them seemed to know what to say either. Down the main corridor, Dora said finally. Left at the second turn. There will be 2 guards at the door. They will not let you through. All right, Meg said. She walked out of the kitchen. The guards were large and their spears were taller than Roy's entire cart. They looked down at the small human girl standing in front of them with a wooden board and a slightly lopsided cake and said nothing for a moment. I made something for the Queen, Meg said. I just want to leave it with her. The guard on the left made a low sound that might have been a laugh. The Queen is not receiving visitors, the guard on the right said. I am not really a visitor, Meg said. My father is fixing the forge. I just want to drop something off. I will not be long. There was a silence. The 2 guards looked at each other over Meg's head. There was something about the way she was standing there, quiet and steady with her little cake, that made it strangely hard to simply say no and be done with it. The guard on the right stepped aside. Meg walked through. The Queen's chamber was very large and very dim. At the far end, beside a tall window full of gray sky, sat Queen Vera. She was enormous even seated. Her scales were deep silver, dull in the low light. Her eyes were open but they were not really looking at anything. She looked up slowly when she heard the small footsteps. Meg crossed the room, set the wooden board down gently on the stone floor in front of the Queen, and stood up straight. My mum used to make this for me when I was sad, she said softly. I thought maybe you would like one too. Queen Vera did not speak at first. She looked down at the small cake on the wooden board. It was golden and soft and slightly uneven on one side. There was a short candle stub beside it that had not been lit. It was the simplest thing anyone had ever placed before her in 300 years of ruling. Meg stood quietly and waited. She did not fidget. She did not try to fill the silence with words. Her mother had taught her that too. Sometimes you just put the thing down and you wait and you let the other person decide what to do with it. Vera's great eyes moved slowly over the cake. Then they moved to the child standing in front of her. Small. Come. A little flower still dusted on the front of her brown coat. You made this, Vera said. Her voice was low and rough, like a sound coming up from deep inside a mountain. Yes, Meg said. Yourself. Yes. The kitchen dragons helped a little. Dora showed me where the honey was. Vera looked back at the cake. One long silence passed. Then another. Why, Vera said. Not quite a question. More like a word she had let out without meaning to. Meg thought about it honestly before answering. You seem sad, she said. And when I am sad my mum makes me this. It does not fix anything. But it helps a little. I thought maybe it would help a little for you too. Something shifted in Vera's face. It was very small and very slow, like a crack forming in the side of a rock that has been standing in the same place for a very long time. I am a queen, Vera said quietly. No one thinks of me as someone who gets sad. Everyone gets sad, Meg said simply. Vera was quiet for a long time after that. Then she reached out one great claw slowly and carefully and touched the edge of the cake. She was gentle about it, the way very large things sometimes are when they are trying not to break something small. She lifted the cake and looked at it for a moment. Then she took a small bite. She chewed slowly. Her eyes closed. It was not the finest food she had ever tasted. It was not rich or complex or prepared with the skill of her court cooks. It was simple and warm and slightly too sweet in one corner where the honey had pooled. It tasted like something made by a pair of small hands that had learned from someone who loved them. Vera took another bite. And then, without any warning, without any sound at first, her eyes filled with tears. They came slowly. One and then another. Running down the great silver scales of her face and dropping silently onto the stone floor. Vera did not make a sound. She did not cover her face or turn away. She simply sat there with the small cake in her claw and cried in the quiet way that people cry when they have been holding something in for a very long time. Meg did not panic. She did not back away. She sat down cross-legged on the cold stone floor in front of the Queen and folded her hands in her lap and waited. After a while Vera took another bite. And then another. She finished the whole cake slowly, every crumb, and then she set the wooden board down with great care. She looked at Meg for a long moment. No one has done something like this for me, she said. Not in a very long time. Perhaps not ever. They bring me grand things. Expensive things. Things that are supposed to impress a queen. She paused. No one has ever just brought me something warm because they thought I might be sad. My mum says that is the whole point, Meg said. The warm thing. Not the expensive thing. Vera let out a long, slow breath. Some of the weight in her great body seemed to ease, just slightly, like something had been set down that she had been carrying alone for too long. Your mother sounds wise, Vera said. She is, Meg said. Then quietly, she passed away last year. But I still remember everything she showed me. Vera looked at the child sitting on her cold stone floor. Small and steady and carrying her own quiet sadness without making a fuss about it. I had forgotten, Vera said softly, what it felt like to be cared for. Meg nodded. I know, she said. That is why I came. Roy finished the forge just as the last light of the afternoon was thinning out against the mountain stone. He wiped his hands on his work cloth and stood back and looked at the great iron furnace. The fire was going. The draw pipe was sealed clean along the seam. He could already feel the warmth beginning to move through the floor, slow and steady, pushing back the cold that had been sitting in the stone for 4 days. He packed his tools one by one back into his bag the way he always did, each one in its proper place. Then he looked around and noticed Meg was not there. He stood up straight and looked at the doorway. The corridor beyond was empty and quiet. Roy picked up his bag and walked out. He checked the corridor first, both directions. Then he followed it back toward the courtyard, thinking she might have gone to sit with the horse. The courtyard was empty. The horse was there, tied to the post where he had left it, pulling at a small pile of dry grass that someone had placed nearby. No Meg. Roy went back inside. He stopped one of the small dragon attendants passing through the corridor and asked if anyone had seen a young human girl, about so tall, brown coat, flower on the front of it. The attendant stopped walking. It looked at Roy with an expression he could not quite read. She is with the queen, the attendant said. Roy opened his mouth. Then he closed it again. I beg your pardon, he said. Your daughter. She is in the queen's chamber. She has been there for some time. Roy stood very still for a moment. Then he picked up his tool bag firmly and said, Take me there please. The walk to the queen's chamber felt very long. Roy kept his face calm the way he did when a job was going wrong and panicking would only make it worse. He thought about what he was going to say. He thought about how to apologize to a dragon queen for his daughter wandering into her private chambers. He thought about whether they were going to be allowed to leave the mountain at all. The 2 guards at the chamber door looked at him as he approached. My daughter, Roy said. I am told she is inside. The guards looked at each other. Then one of them pushed the door open without a word. Roy stepped inside. The chamber was large and dim and warmer than the rest of the stronghold, which meant the heat from the forge was already finding its way through the mountain walls. At the far end of the room, beside the tall window, sat Queen Vera. Her great silver head was tilted slightly downward. And sitting on the stone floor beside her, cross-legged and perfectly at ease, was Meg. They were talking. Meg was saying something about the way her father sorted his tools by size and how she had once rearranged them as a joke and he had not found it funny at all. Vera made a low sound that Roy slowly realized was a laugh. Roy stood in the doorway and did not move. Vera looked up and saw him. Her expression was different from what he had expected. He had prepared himself for irritation or coldness, or the flat look of someone about to make a complaint. But her eyes were calm and her face was easier than he imagined a queen's face ever looked. You are the father, Vera said. Yes, Roy said carefully. I am very sorry if she disturbed you. She wanders when I am working. I should have kept a closer eye on her. It will not happen again. Vera looked at him for a moment. She did not disturb me, Vera said simply. She is the first person in a very long time who treated me as though I was allowed to be sad. That is not a small thing. Roy looked at Meg. Meg looked back at him with the calm expression of a child who knew she had not done anything wrong. Vera called for her attendants. She paid Roy 3 times the agreed fee, pressing the coins into his hand herself. She then dictated a letter on the spot, sealed it with her mark and placed it in Roy's other hand. Safe passage, the attendant quietly explained, through every dragon territory on the continent. For Roy and his daughter. For as long as they lived. Roy folded both carefully into his coat pocket and could not find a single word to say. They said their goodbyes. Meg hugged Dora in the kitchen on the way out, which made Dora stand very stiff and then very slowly pat the child once on the back with one large hand. The other kitchen dragons pretended not to watch. The gates closed behind them as the cart rolled back down the mountain road. The sky had gone a deep quiet blue and the first stars were coming out. Roy held the reins and looked straight ahead at the road. Meg sat beside him with her hands in her pockets and her boots dangling off the seat. After a long while Roy reached over and put one hand briefly on top of her head the way he used to when she was very small. Then he put his hand back on the reins and kept his eyes on the road. He did not say anything. Some things a father just has to smile about.